Good afternoon. Questions?
The news of today, we saw the analysis of the expected price of the LGA AirTrain go up to $2.05 billion. A lot of folks were kind of confused by that, considering it's only 1.5 mile of track. How can you justify the increasing cost? I mean, this was originally pegged as a $450 million project several years ago.
Well, we are completely committed to providing rail mass transit access to our airports. We have put on the table the construction of the LaGuardia AirTrain in order to get people out of their cars and provide a capability to get both from Midtown Manhattan to the airport in under half an hour, and to also have easy access from the entire Long Island Railroad network. We are recommending to the board the addition of a new Newark AirTrain. These are expensive projects, there's no question. But if we are to reap the benefits of mass transit, we have to provide mass transit that is attractive to individual travelers and their families. What experience shows is that rail mass transit is the most attractive alternative, and we are committed to providing that. Infrastructure is expensive. Both AirTrains are estimated to cost in approximately $2 billion. We are moving forward with both, and we think the benefits of rail mass transit justify that.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Yes. Those of us who have been doing this for a while remember back in the day where the federal government was a real player in transportation. I think I date myself, but Bob Rowe. And to what degree is the federal government's historical withdrawal over the arc of in the post-World War II environment, say in the last 20 years, played a role in putting the squeeze on agencies like the Port Authority to make up the difference in consumers, we heard it upstairs in terms of labor, and in having to locally raise the money?
Well, it is a big problem. The federal government has been a critical partner with local transportation agencies in providing top quality transportation resources. What we have seen, multiple examples, probably the leading one in this region is the Gateway Project, where the federal government has backed away from its historic role of supporting major regional transportation projects. And what that does is it leaves to the transportation agency itself the entire burden of financing infrastructure. Infrastructure is very expensive, therefore it needs funding. When that funding is not shared as a burden between the local governmental authorities and the federal government, it is precisely the problem, which is the entire burden falls on the local transportation agency. This transportation agency, and I might say the states of New York and New Jersey for their projects, are stepping up. But what that does is it puts the entire burden on the residents of the community to finance the project.
Harking about, yeah, sure. Congressman Rowe, for those that don't know, served for many, many years in New Jersey. Back in the day, you had Congressman Rowe, you had Howard, you had Rockema. A lot of those folks had decades of experience. At one point, Congressman Rowe had one of the most powerful jobs, actually doling out the billions across the country in his very powerful chairmanship. Well, that doesn't exist right now. Obviously, we have a lot of the Congress members and senators are advocating strongly on behalf of the port and behalf of this region. Different time, different era, and I'm hoping we can have the federal buy-in at some point.
But it's just maybe for a follow-up. But it's not just the federal government's a neutral player. They're also continuing to the march in terms of regulation. You've had to respond proactively as you had in terms of deposit traction, all the other things they put upon you. So it's not like they've let up in terms of that mandate. They've continued to press on that front.
They have absolutely continued to press. Those are unfunded mandates, as they have generally, many people have generally pointed out. So the obligation frequently justified, but winds up with no assistance coming along with it. And the historic pattern, obviously, as you are recalling, was mandate comes along with at least a sharing of the financial burden.
So go to your history lesson. So I think it was 2001, Donnie DeFrancesco, the governor, I think, signed into a law that state mandates state pay.
Right.
That's something we try to adhere to on that side of the Hudson. Obviously, the feds don't share that mandate, but Positive Train Control, which we were the first in the nation to get it done from a safety standpoint and from an efficiency standpoint, they mandate it, but you're right, it cost us millions. It had to get done from a safety standpoint, but gave us no mechanism to fund it. Appreciate your comment, Larry.
Obviously, you heard from some folks from the PATH unions. Wanted to find out, what is the Port Authority doing to try to get a resolution with the PATH Rail Group, and can the non-agreement pact, or whatever you would call it, be used as a model for that?
So a couple of things. So we talked about when we came here almost 2 years ago, if you can believe it, Larry. There were 23 unions that had not had a contract in anywhere from 2 to 10, 11, 12 years. Rick Cotton has taken the lead on that with Michael Farbiage, our counsel, and our HR, Mary Lee, and we have made this a focus and promised to resolve these contracts. We have worked extraordinarily hard. Rick Cotton and his team has worked extraordinarily hard to resolve those contracts, and that's the last group that's outstanding, and it's difficult. There's some really tough negotiations. We're still hopeful. I think there's a meeting as of late this week internally to try to come up with something innovative to resolve this. We're still committed to getting it done, Larry, as we said 2 years ago, and we've gotten a lot of it done. We're just at hopefully the tail end of this.
I think the framework here, Larry, is that there were 23 unions when we came here. Every single union at the Port Authority, including PATH, had expired. We found that just an unacceptable state of affairs. What we did really in the first year that we were here was to get across the finish line with 12 of the unions. So we have a framework and we have a set of proposals that 12 unions have found reasonable. It was very hard negotiation. We did not wind up with our proposal. This was a hard-fought set of negotiations, but we got across the finish line with 12 unions. The PATH unions, we have not made progress with so far. Based on our experience with 12 unions, we are hopeful that we will be able to find, through hard negotiation, hard bargaining, we will find an acceptable place where we can actually achieve agreement. But so far, we have not been able to do
And
that.
as of last week, Larry, we had met with two unrepresentative groups. We had negotiations with them since January, and we were pleased to say we came out of those meetings with a completed negotiation, and we actually got a standing ovation from one of the groups saying thank you very much for the closure, and even though they didn't get clearly all that they wanted, but it's a process. It's hard. It's tough stuff.
They mentioned, though, that there's a non-agreement pact that was recently signed this month. Is that something that could be used as a model, since we're talking about railroad workers who obviously are different categories of workers than, say, police or other unions that you may have settled with before?
Well, we're prepared to explore any avenue to get to an agreement, and that may be one. We're open to seeing if that can move forward. But as I say, we are at the bargaining table with a single goal, which is to reach agreement.
Questions?
Second question about Atlantic City Airport. What's the status of the Atlantic City Airport study? And there was a comment that Senate President Sweeney made in the Atlantic City Press, where he said that this quote, "The Port Authority should buy, not operate Atlantic City Airport." What are your thoughts about that statement?
Well, to the first comment, operationally, I was under the impression that we were putting together the internal RFP to retain a consultant and a group. I think we're at the tail end of that.
We are. We're very close to signing it with an appropriate scope of work.
And to the point, we're well aware, Senate President Sweeney and the various Congress members and elected officials down there are really intent on having the Port Authority take a look and take over that airport. We're really familiar with that.
Is there a financial impact that's been looked at? Any kind of a cost estimate? I mean, obviously.
I think it's early in the game, Larry. I think we want to sit down with the consultant and the team that we're going to have in place, really outline what that scope is. But I don't have an estimate, but obviously within short order we'll have that.
That is part of the scope, to have a full analysis on the basis of which the Port Authority can understand the financial implications.
And Mr. Cotton, actually, just just now, the Taxi Drivers Alliance, they were talking, and you did respond to them, just saying, you know, you do plan to meet with them and just talk with them. Any plans that you have on what to tell these representatives here who were pleading?
Well, let's just step back. There are more than a dozen proposals on the table. Those proposals reflect the fact that we are committed to improving our infrastructure, and to do that requires funding. What we have now done is put those proposals out for comment. That is where we are. Obviously, we heard the concerns, specifically with respect to taxi drivers. There are other voices that have expressed concerns about other proposals. And what we want to do in the context of the public hearing process and the public comment process is understand what issues people want to raise with respect to any of those proposals. Taxi drivers obviously have a very specific set of concerns. I did want to correct what was apparently their understanding, which is that the proposal for the taxi drivers is only the pickup charge. That charge for the Uber and for-hire vehicle is for both a pickup and a drop-off charge. But we do intend to listen. That is the point of a public comment period, and we will meet with key stakeholders, and the commissioners will hear directly in 6 public hearings, 3 in New York and 3 in New Jersey.
And to underscore that point, obviously, we'll continue having meetings with those folks who request them. We have opened up through the web the exchange of comments. We want to hear from the public. But those 6 meetings, 3 in New Jersey, 3 in New York, will be staffed by senior staff as well as 2 commissioners, one from New York, one from New Jersey. Will be each one in earnest, and we will absolutely listen very carefully to what's being said and comments being made.
So back on the fare and toll hikes, the board has insisted that we need to keep pace with inflation, but these hikes are in some ways above inflation. For instance, the AirTrain, I think the rate of inflation would be 6.95. You're proposing 7.75. How did you come to those numbers, and why is it above the rate of inflation then?
Well, it is approximately the rate of inflation over their different years, but since 2003 and 2005, there has not been a single increase. I would defy anyone to identify something that is still at the same charge in 2003 and 2005 that it is today. Construction costs have gone up. We are committed in terms of both the LaGuardia AirTrain and the Newark AirTrain to build new AirTrains and to provide mass transit links that actually get people out of cars. In order to do that, we need to have funding sources. One, but only one of the funding sources is the fare, and the fare needs to keep up not only with inflation, but it needs to provide at least an appropriate contribution to the actual operation and cost of the AirTrains themselves.
Hey, Libby, can you come over and take us back to 2008 and talk about how the CPI was voted on at that point and how we calculated from 2008 to present day?
Yes, so in 2008, when the board was taking other actions with respect to tolls, it created an automatic inflation adjustment mechanism. That mechanism took the last enacted toll and then accumulated CPI with respect to that. And once that accumulated CPI hit a dollar trigger, the inflation adjustment would become active and applied across the board with respect to the tolls. That same mechanism was confirmed and reaffirmed by the board in 2011 when it took its specific series of scheduled toll increases. And then that was considered, as the board looked forward in adopting its capital plan, that was a pre-existing mandate.
Yes.
Sorry, a little distracting when I was going to ask that question, right? How do you get rate of inflation, but the prices seem bigger? Do you have a formula of how what you just explained actually works, given, like, say, the AirTrain? Because, I hear you saying you need more money, but, as been pointed out, it is bigger than the rate of inflation.
Well, so let me start with the tolls. So the tolls are the ones that have that dollar trigger, right? And so if you look at the tolls from the last increase, it's $15, roughly running at about 2% a year inflation. That's 8% inflation. That gets you the dollar. and that's where we're tracking, and that's what we're seeing. When you go back with respect to the air trains, you have to go back to 2003. You follow that same, taking the CPI from then forward to today.
So you're compounding it, basically.
Yeah, you've got a lot of pent-up inflation from 2003 to 2019, and that's what's if reflected in that proposal with respect to the air trains. Okay?
So that's like a 55% increase. How much compounding is there? I mean, if you could put it in lay terms, because when we do the story, people are going to say that's a 55% increase from 2003. How is that inflation? What is it, 2% a year?
Well, again, back to 2003, that's not the same formula. Frankly, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but we can follow up with you.
Well, maybe instead of just the late, isn't that an issue for Port Authority? You have a formula, but you have to sell this to the public, right?
We do have to sell it to the public, and what we are asking the public is to recognize that to provide air train service to the airports is expensive, and there has not been a single increase since 2003 and 2005, and we have arrived at the $775 fare as an appropriate fare literally 15 or more years following no increase.
And then just last, I have a question on the taxis, and apologize if people have asked this, but you say, this is what peer cities do, peer airports, LAX, right? Did you look at the taxi industry, and would you consider the way the fees that taxi drivers have to deal with here in New York, is it fair to call, say the LA taxi industry a peer industry?
Well, what we did not come up with this proposal out of thin air. What we looked at was our 4 peer airports in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in Chicago, and DC. This proposed fee structure is precisely the one that exists in Los Angeles. It is actually less than what exists in San Francisco and Chicago. The basis of that is that we have to have revenue sources, and we have to operate facilities, and we have to invest in bringing them up to 21st century standards. There are a dozen different fare and toll and fee increases that we have put on the table for public input. We have tried to share the burden. No price increase is painless. What we have tried to do is to find appropriate increases, looking at each proposal, and put them forward essentially as a package and seeking public comment. We're looking forward to hearing from all stakeholders, from the public, from elected officials, in terms of each of these proposals. As I said at the meeting, we will meet with particular stakeholders. We hear the concerns that the taxi industry has put on the table, and we intend to meet with them. The commissioners will hear from them, I'm sure, in the public hearings, and at the end of the process, which is almost 90 days from now, collectively, we will decide whether to modify the recommendation, and the board will make its judgment as to what is appropriate in the circumstances.
Mr. Khan, my question was about, do you consider the New York City taxi industry specifically similar to the taxi industry in LA? Because you're using LA as an example, peer cities, to charge them a new charge. What I'm asking is, how do you compare the New York City taxi industry to the taxi industry in other airlines that receive that fee?
So we have looked at what we consider our 4 peer airports in the largest cities in the country. We have put a proposal forth, and we look forward to hearing from the taxi industry in New York as to their concerns.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I think there's one of the multi-million-dollar elephant in the room is congestion pricing. And we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you, how does that factor into your macro planning? Because New York is setting a precedent doing that. It's fairly robust. How does that work into these calculations in terms of not just what you need, but in a more holistic sense of what the region can bear?
Well, I think it's a fair question. The decisions with respect to congestion pricing do not sit with us. They sit with the Traffic Mobility Review Board, which is within the MTA. When those decisions are made, they'll be made at the end of next year. There is no question that we will look at those and we will make decisions as to their implications for Port Authority decisions.
So let me just finish up. So, the Port Authority is its own independent agency, as you well know. It's been here since 1921, built for the singular purpose of providing transportation means for this area. And it's done really well for the last 98 years, and it's self-sufficient. So if you want to build bridges and tunnels and airports and paths and ports, those things cost money. And you want to have the state-of-the-art and the quality, and you want to have them safe and secure, that costs money. Nobody's happy about having to, trot these things out. These things started in 2008 in terms of, the CPI. If you want to have all of the infrastructure that was contemplated back when this agency was started in 1921, these are the type of topics, these are the type of areas, these are the type of revenues that are required to maintain this infrastructure. But we're open. Listen, if after 90 days, and we get input, and there's a push and there's a shove, we're going to be open-minded.
You're not in a bubble. You're not in a bubble, is all I'm saying.
We don't live in a bubble.
Right.
That's the answer to your question.
And the reason for the public hearings is to address the bubble problem. We want to hear from the public, we want to hear from stakeholders, and we will take their issues and comments into account.
And these are all
Listen,
taking
if we didn't
place-
want to hear from anybody, the 2008 vote did not require it to go back to the public. We can say the CPI kicks in, there's your dollar, there's your rate increase, and we can hide from the public. That's not what we did. We said we're taking this to the public and having the 6 meetings and having this very public and transparent display.
And they're all taking place in July, right? All these meetings are throughout?
Yes, they're taking place in the last 2 weeks of July. There are 3 in the 3rd week and 3 in the 4th week.
Anybody else?
In the annual reports that you guys have, your operating reports, it shows that the World Trade Center, in total lost $320 million last year. And these fare and toll hikes are going to bring in $225 theoretically. How much of of what you're losing at World Trade Center is factoring into this decision when you're trying to raise new money?
Every single dollar that the Port Authority collects goes into a single accounting pool, so that there is no tracing of money in terms of any particular project. Where we are is the Port Authority operates a broad array of facilities. World Trade Center is obviously one, but what is needed in terms of the entire capital plan, which is our commitment to improve what are clearly subpar transportation facilities into 21st century facilities, it as a collective needs funding support. And that is what we have proposed to do, which is across the agency, we need the increases that we have put on the table. We've tried to share them across all users of our facilities. We've tried to make the burden appropriate, measured, and that is the package that we put forward.
Anything else? Okay, thank you all.